Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast, which helps entrepreneurs generate more impact, wealth, and success, attract others for all the right reasons, and become a smart connector, the architect of your amazing business and life. This podcast is sponsored by Virtual Non-Execs, the world's #1 peer-to-peer board advisor community, which connects thousands of investors, entrepreneurs, and advisors globally. Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. My name's Jane Bayler. It's great to have you here with us. I have the most wonderful guest for you today. This is James Cuss. Welcome, James.
Oh, thank you, Jane. It's really nice to be on your podcast.
So James is CEO and founder of Rocket Industries, and he'll be talking about that in just a moment. And I am also very privileged to have him as one of my clients. So it is so good to have the opportunity to unpick not just what Rocket Industries is all about and why it's such an exciting, fast growth business, but also we're going to look at some really interesting topics today, including showing you how to focus on what truly matters, shifting your focus from attention to intention, and how to create white space in your day to achieve more, reduce stress, and find greater joy and clarity in your life. So, really important topics as an entrepreneur. So, before we get into that, I'd really just like you to introduce yourself, James, and tell us what you're up to with Rocket Industries.
Okay, well, thanks, Jane. It's an absolute privilege to be here. So essentially, Rocket Industries is focused on removing affordability barriers for self-funded learners in the UK. So as many people out there know, the traditional education system, it doesn't serve everybody. And with the world going so fast and new technologies emerging like AI, and there's a need to actually get skilled upskilling in very niche skill sets to access high paid work. So in the last 2 years, Rocket Industries Learner Finance has helped over 80,000 individuals access that training. So we're really making an impact. So I guess I see myself as a social entrepreneur. I feel that every entrepreneur has a responsibility to leave the world in a better place than they found it. I do run a podcast about visionaries called Rocket Pod. And it's all about, how do you help folks to take that first step to improve themselves? So so I think that's really important to me as far as an individual and having values and really wanting to make that impact.
Yeah, and Rocket Industries is a really exciting business. And as I said, I'm very privileged to support James in the growth of that. So, James, tell us a little bit more about your personal history as well, because that's really interesting. You're actually a very rounded kind of a guy. So, yeah, tell us more about where you come from and what you did before you did this, and also what makes you tick.
I guess it depends on how far we want to go back. But so I'll try and keep it brief and interesting. So I grew up in a family that worked in the aviation business. So from a very young boy, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time in East Africa. And if I look back at my life, I think some of the happiest moments of my life were, I used to spend 8 hours snorkeling in the Indian Ocean, looking for shells and fish and just really having that time to play as a child. So I think that sense of adventure has kind of followed me through to the present day. So as a family, so I'm a husband and father of 3 beautiful daughters. The eldest is 21. She's a BA cabin crew, so bouncing around the world. I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. Both are very artistic, but we've really prioritized travel and experiences as a family. So I think, that my business activities over the years. I spent a lot of time in sales, being that hunter like I was snorkeling and looking for things. And I've worked in many different industries, from selling enterprise software to brain surgeons to, working in the air charter, fixed and rotor wing, logistics. And I've basically found there's a pattern in each of these industries. And I've always had a fascination behind the psychology of what make people tick. And I think having kind of prioritized travel, I've been to some weird and wonderful places on the planet, and I want to continue that. So I kind of bring that energy and that interest in people to my work. And it's not surprising that Rocket Industries' focus is really kind of helping folks kind of improve their lives and actually, seeking adventure in something new. So I'm a big initiator of new things. I think and we're getting to this, one of the weaknesses I have is actually I do like shiny things. So I think part of the reason why I'm working with Jane, I got in touch was, I've got all these fragments, these little gold threads, and it's like, how do I position myself and pull things together into a kind of a cohesive narrative to what I do. And I think, working with Jane and having a book of my own on the go, it's just like, it's like, who is James and why is he doing what he does? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor. But yeah, I love experiences and I love travel and love people and I love to make a difference.
Oh, that's really great, James. And the adventurer and the explorer, I think that's such an important part of what you do. And when we talk, I'm always astounded by the things that you do and the things that you make time for, and all of these adventures that you and your family have. And you really have managed to build a very successful, systemized business whilst achieving a very balanced life, which is something that a lot of entrepreneurs don't manage. So, what would you say is the key to your success in that respect?
I would say, and we talked about this briefly before we came on air, I think it's important to know where you are on your journey. So, for example, my lifestyle now, may not be relevant for you. If I take myself in my late 20s, 30s, my life looked very different. So, what I would say is a couple of things. I've never been someone that's settled with anything. So, I think, my grandmother used to say to me, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. So that's kind of been my North Star. Another big part is, I'm a great believer in tilling the soil. And I know that there's different ways to network and everything else, but it's being curious and it's basically, turning over stones, just like I was when I was a young boy in Kenya, looking for treasures. And then I think just having an open mind, because quite often we don't know when these opportunities might present themselves. So I think it's really getting self-aware to know, the opportunity is worth pursuing. And sometimes they come in mysterious ways. And I think, quite often, certainly as a young person, I was quite fixed minded and maybe not open to new ways to think. So I think, you can develop an open mind and develop that awareness of, opportunities and recognize them for what they are. So I think my journey's been tilling the soil, just keep trying, keep, meeting people, keep, understanding what your strengths are. And then over time, maybe delegate some things that maybe you're weaker at. But, that you can only do that through hard won experience, I think. Some things, I'll give you an example. My business partner at Rocket, he could spend 12 hours on a spreadsheet and feel energized at the end of it. I can do spreadsheets, but it exhausts me, so I think over time, over the years, you understand what kind of fills you up with energy and what
Mhm.
things, are maybe a bit of a drain, and knowing that you can't do anything because, you will burn out if you try and do too much.
I think that's such an important point, James. And I think it's something that we acquire more wisdom around that as we get older, because, of course, we understand ourselves more. We've had more time to make mistakes and do that trial and error. And I think that is one of the benefits of actually being more mature as an entrepreneur, is that you mentioned the shiny pennies. Of course, there are always temptations, there are always new and different things coming out. But I think once you know yourself, as you said, and you know your strengths and you understand them and you understand what gives you energy and what depletes it, then I think you're off to a really good start. Do you think?
No, I think that's very true. That's very true. And it takes time, and I think, again, my comment about knowing where you are, I think, we can get stuck in ruts, we can tell ourselves that we can't do something. I think it's really just having the courage to take that first step. One little thing that I integrated into my life in 2010, it wasn't my idea. So it was a guy called Darren Hardy's idea. He wrote a book called The Compound Effect. And actually, I
Mhm.
later found out that his mentor was a guy called Jeff Olson, who authored The Slight Edge. And it's the little things that are easy to do, but also easy not to do. So, is it the apple or the Mars bar? Is it getting out and putting your gym shoes on or staying in bed and having another cup of tea? These little things. But out of that came this little discipline. So to read 10 pages of a non-fiction book every day. And I've pretty much done that since 2010. It's completely changed my life because, we don't have all the answers. We might think we have all the answers, but I think, if you can't find mentors, which we talk about this, Jane, a lot, you can't find mentors, then the next best thing is, is books. And there's some wonderful wisdom out there. I think you can get to the point where you've kind of read enough and need to actually put these things into action. You can know exactly what to do and actually not do the thing. But if you can actually find this discipline to be open to learning new things and then be disciplined about putting very tiny little actions into your day, I think you'll see the results over many years. And it quite often takes, if I look back at my life, I'm 50 next year, so I've been around for a little bit. Things happen in decades, so, don't, I think people, well, how does they, I know it's a bit cliche, but, people underestimate what they can do in a year, or overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. So it's
Mm.
the long game and, being open to learning more.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So many interesting things there, James, that you said, and the compound effect and that incremental impact of those small daily actions. I absolutely love that. And I often think about that as well. Because, as you said, 2010, you decided, you made the decision to read 10 pages of a nonfiction book every day. I mean, I don't know how long that takes you, but 15 minutes, something like that?
It
15
depends.
minutes a day.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes you're on a roll and you can get through things quick. Some books, it's really dry reading. So, I'm not the fastest reader, so I might read the same page 3 times. I mean, it drives me nuts, but I really want to try and understand it. So I think it depends. But even if you're exhausted late at night and you think, you know what, I've got to do my 10. And maybe, of course, sometimes we fall off the wagon, but maybe you do 20 the following day. So, you don't need to be too regimented. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And sometimes you have a little break, but then it's just getting back on to the, it's just a good habits. And actually, I mean, I'd like to read more fiction because I think you could learn a lot from fiction as well. So it's not, but I think the non-fiction piece is if you have an interest and you really want to build a business, then you go learn from people that have been there and done that. And then on the mentorship thing, I'm a great believer in seeking out people that might be 10 years behind you and seeking out people that might be 10 years ahead of you. So I think again, it's this idea that we have a responsibility as entrepreneurs to really maybe help pull up the folks that might need our help. And I know that you're doing this in spades, Jane, with your books and your podcasts. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah, it's as you said, I think that's one of the wonderful things about entrepreneurship is that rather than just being in a faceless corporation where essentially we're just serving the needs of some faceless entity, really, for the most part, the wonderful thing about entrepreneurship is that we can actually make the impact that we want. And I think if we are really actively trying to be the best version of ourselves and learn with every day that passes and stay open to new opportunities, fresh learning, and so on, then it's inevitable. I think we are going to inspire others. But as you said, we also need to be inspired ourselves because that's what keeps us fresh. It's receiving and then giving, and then receiving and then giving. And I think it's that kind of dynamic cycle that really keeps us alive, just, I mean, spiritually, emotionally, energetically, not just practically, because there are plenty of people who are walking around who are alive, but inside they're not growing, they've died. And we need to reach those people if we can and just give them some fresh energy and some fresh motivation so that they can learn and achieve too, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And I think, it's also quite often we've all been on the hamster wheel, right? Where we just on the hamster wheel, we kind of got our blinders on. And sometimes it's just good to take a time out and to kind of reflect on maybe the things that are going well, things that are not doing so well. And I think you have to almost give yourself permission. There's almost like this scarcity mindset where, I came from a world where I was working, 7 days a week. I've been involved with 12 startups over the last 15 years, lots of failures. But as Einstein said, if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same result. But I think moving from a really kind of unbalanced life where it's all about work and hustle, hustle, to a world where, just having the time to, take the time out, carve out that wide space. I know you kind of introduced that at the beginning, just for reflection, really. And then with that, you can then move forward. It's almost like slowing down to speed up. So I think, I wish I found out sooner, but I mean, we all discover these things. We have to discover these things on our own. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to be told, isn't it? You know, there are some things that we'll some wisdom that we'll accept and some things that we do have to find out for ourselves. But something I just wanted to reflect on there, James, is I remember I used to do life drawing because I started my career as an art director. And I do remember one of the lessons that one of my art tutors said to me is when you're doing life drawing, you shouldn't look at the shape, you should look at the spaces. So
Hmm.
what you have to look at, that's where you start. So if somebody is, they've got their elbow, they're leaning like that, you look at what's there around them as opposed to just trying to draw the outline. And I thought that was really interesting, that concept of actually looking at the space. And that's something to do with that white space that you were talking about. If you just focus on the work, it's like looking at the outline, isn't it? The shape. But the interesting stuff is what happens in the intersection or the space. That is where the interesting and creative process actually starts to be unlocked, right?
Yeah, well, coincidentally, I mean, I spent 7 years at art college years ago, and
Oh,
I did a whole project on the spaces in between, whether it's foliage, or I did a whole project on the sea, like
oh,
crashing waves, and
oh,
actually, but again, I think it just you just look at the world very differently. Also, my motorcycling career, if you see something in your way, you don't look at the thing, you look at the gap. Otherwise, you're going to hit the thing. So there's a pothole. If you look at the
oh,
pothole, you're going to always 9 times out of 10 you will hit that pothole. But you've got to
oh.
find the gaps. And actually, when you're going pretty high speed and there's something unfolding, an accident, in the making, look for the gaps. So I think actually it works in lots of different settings, doesn't it?
It
But it's just
does.
knowing it's actually more important sometimes. I'm a big believer on the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% of the value is going to be from 20% of your inputs. I know it's kind of a general rule. 80% of your problems are going to be from 20% of the inputs. So, having carving out that white space actually enables you to figure out what those 20% are. Then you can do 20% of the 20 and you keep going. It's called Pareto's Law.
It's called what?
Pareto's Law.
Oh, Pareto's Law. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us, James, let's kind of go from talking about that conceptually to actually how you apply this white space discipline to your own life.
Okay, so if I kind of go back to we all have times in our lives where we have to face really hard things. And I think everybody has hard times, right? I don't think anyone really
Yeah.
gets a free ticket. I mean, some people might be a bit luckier, they might get a head start, but I think adversity, it's almost, Who was that? There's a psychologist called Lebowski who was, I think, one of the first to coin positive psychology, where I'm sorry, it's basically you have a disintegration of the psyche, but then you can actually rebuild stronger. That's just like even metals are heated up really hot and the atoms kind of move displace and they come back even stronger. So I think in life, when we are faced with that adversity, there's a way to come back together and be stronger. So in my case, my last startup, I was 4 years, 7 days a week, and it didn't work, and everything kind of collapsed, imploded, and I didn't have any balance in my life. And I think that to me was the kind of the trigger point for me to. I mean, it nearly ruined my marriage. My relationship, the people that were really near and dear to me. I wasn't available. I mean, I was there physically, but not mentally.
Mm.
So it took that extreme to have a catastrophic like implosion. And actually, I was completely delusional, and I was, I raised a bunch of money, and I had these investors, and I really believed it was going to work. But I reached a point where literally it didn't. It wasn't working. My business partner had to go back to Ukraine to rescue his family. My other business partner had family, personal issues that she had to drop her, deal with things. I mean, you couldn't even make it up. I mean, there's
Oh,
lots of obviously details there, but that was the realization where literally I realized that I had to, man up and change my ways, because my behavior was very destructive, even though I was really trying to kind of change the world. And entrepreneurship can be really hard on family life. So I kind of did a bit of a reversal, and I moved from the 7 day kind of die hard, let's just toughen up approach, boneheaded. And, my wife did tell me to man up, and I took it really seriously, but it meant that I just had to completely slow down and all transition to, I would say in my world now, it's 3 days of very intense focus. And then the other 2 days are more reactive, but it means that I can do things like this. So on a Monday and a Friday, I'm open to creative projects. It gives me time to, feel different ideas. You know, I still, but I have the option of just taking some time out. So I think that has kind of revolutionized my productivity. I've been able to make better choices because I'm a bit more rested. I do prioritize sleep. I do meditate on a very regular basis. And I was very new to meditation a few years ago. And that's actually helped me with the 80/20 because when I'm meditating, when I'm having my time out, and actually I know depending on what spiritual or religious beliefs you have, we'll all have a different way to tackle this. So it's not one size fits all. It might be a walk in the park, it might be a walk in the forest, it might be whatever. I'm not going to prescribe what might work for you versus what works for me. But I found that, that time out for me, I would get these little thoughts that, I bat away the thoughts because my mind's kind of always going. It's like try to kind of completely still my mind. And then something will come in from left field and it will literally be like, that's what I got to do. That is the one thing. What is the one thing I can do today to really move the needle? So
Yeah.
it was literally, for me, it was literally this, it was a wonderful watershed moment where, I had all these answers inside me, but because I was tied up like a rubber band, it was very humbling. You can have an amazing team, amazing board of directors, a great technology platform, an amazing brand, amazing advisors around you and still not succeed. I mean, it was a really hard thing, whether it's my ego or, I mean, everything was into this thing. So that, challenge, I thought it just implosion, I was able to reset and just have, I would say, better priorities. And I think that one of the main things that really kind of made the difference as well, as I was going through this process of giving myself that white space, that time out, was that I became more present. And that was
Mhm.
one thing that I've struggled with my whole life. I've got a foot dragging in the past. I mean, we all have this at a certain point. Got a foot dragging in the past from past, traumas and everything else. And then I've got a foot in the future, but I'm actually not present. So I think by slowing down, creating that white space enables you to become more present, enables you to make better decisions. I mean, I would say for those younger listeners out there, one key goal really is to make better choices and better decisions. And I used to think you are your thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. Our mind has it's very powerful and it can deceive us. And actually we can be lied to with our thoughts. So I
Yeah.
think it's just basically trying to figure out, it's resetting, it's trying to figure out what's important, almost like what kind of life do you want to build and then work backwards. There's actually an analogy that I know I've been rambling on a little bit here, but there's an analogy that Guy, my business partner, was telling me about the Mars bar. Two Mars isn't the same as one. That first Mars bar, that's really important. But what's it going to take to get that other half Mars bar? Is it worth it? We're not on the planet for very long. How much money do you need? So actually, just before I just stop talking here, I think what I realized is that time was actually more important than actually chasing that big exit that I was. I was chasing that big, sexy, fancy exit. But since I've done this, my business has literally just, I mean, it has rocketed. I mean, it's growing,
Yes.
right? So,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
very, very
a lot,
successful.
lot of it's timing. Okay, the market conditions, the uncertainty of the government, the rise of technology. There's lots of market conditions that explain why it's working. But I think just making those important decisions and making sure that you're focusing on the right thing to move the needle the most, it means that you can actually carve out more time for yourself rather than just be
Yeah.
on the hamster wheel the whole time.
Oh, yeah. I love that so much. You've said so many important things there, James. I probably have about 10 points that I could pick up on, but I love the idea of the one thing. What one thing can I do today? What one thing can I
Mhm.
do that is going to make a difference? And I think I was listening to, I can't remember, but he was some kind of big influencer. And he said that you know, what a lot of people don't do, and what they should be doing is if they have a problem that is a really problem, if they just lock themselves away in a room for half an hour or an hour with no distractions, and they just sat there and they just thought about what is the answer to this problem? How can I solve this problem? That the answer would come in that time just by
Mhm.
switching off. And I thought, well, that is very interesting because we never do that. We're constantly surrounded by, so much noise, particularly with all the distractions that we have online, that we very rarely actually just shut everything off and say, I have a problem. What is the problem and how can I find a solution to this? And so I love that simplicity and that clarity of thought that you're bringing now as a result of these processes that you've implemented in your own life, James. Really good. Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
Well,
inspirational.
thank you. Well, the glass is always half full, right? Every day is going to bring different challenges. I think another way as well, and this is, I mean, I've got three young daughters. I tell them that there's always going to be weeds, right? Like there's always going to be weeds coming up.
Yeah,
And sometimes they're going to be big oak trees, right? Really big things, really hard, painful things that you've got to deal with. And sometimes you need
yeah.
to get a stump grinder and grind them out. But if you can kind of be self-aware, and actually that's a double-edged sword because it takes a lifetime sometimes to become self-aware and figure out who you are. But if you just accept the fact that everyone has weeds and they're going to come in different forms, sometimes they're going to be career, sometimes it's going to be, your personal life. You're always going to get hard things. And it's just maintaining them. It's just pulling them up as they come and not letting them drag you down. Because I think sometimes we can all get overwhelmed and almost like buried. And we think it's not fair and we start resenting the world. And it's just, why me? The thing is, I came to the realization that everyone deals with difficult things. But if you just look at them as weeds, they need to be plucked up and then you can plant new seeds and maybe you can plant some, wild flowers and if you nurture
Oh,
them and till the
yeah.
soil, then they're going to, bring some abundance into your life. So it's just these
Oh.
little habits, these little choices, and just knowing that, yeah, you just have to deal with things and not get down about it.
I think that is so lovely and it's a beautiful analogy as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why we get on so well together, James, because, you do have a creative background and the ability to actually talk in imagery. And so that concept of having a garden that's full of weeds, it's easy to visualize, isn't it? And any one of those weeds is perhaps a bad habit, a bad thought, a challenge, a problem, and as you said, we all have them every single day, but just systematically going through the garden and sprinkling some wildflower seeds and pulling up the weeds. And it's just such a nice idea. I love that. I'll keep that in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, the example might be, I mean, we've been working together for several months now, but, you've connected me with a few folks. There's a few folks that, will be connected with you. These are little seeds that you don't know where they might lead, but it's almost like you kind of build a bit of momentum
Mm.
through the process. And sometimes you need to get the garden crew in, you need to get coaches or get people to help you, get the
Oh, yeah.
chainsaw out and really kind of completely blitz your garden. Maybe your garden's overgrown and it needs to be completely cleared out, but that's okay.
Yeah. But
That is
bit of
absolutely
Japanese
okay.
knotweed.
Yeah,
Yeah. Some
exactly.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So we can't always do it. I'm just saying that we can't. It's not always. Sometimes we can't do it all on our own. So that's why you have to seek out either the books or the mentors or the coaches to perhaps help us through it, or family members or friends. I think
yeah.
society does kind of tell us to, we got to like toughen up and do it ourselves, but that is actually, it's not true. And look at any successful person, they'll have had help along the way, and it's just, that's why gratitude's so important, and passing back the value. So it's almost like a number of years ago, actually, my family, we sold 95% of everything we owned to go on a world trip. And while we were traveling around the world with the family, when kids were 5, 7, and 9, I had this idea. I probably picked this up in a book or something, but going to build a love letter list of the people that have actually, perhaps given me that first job, or
Mm.
or lent a helping hand, and then writing love letters to these folks. And
Oh,
it was a really cathartic process to actually say thank
really?
you to folks that have made an impact on me. And I recommend that. That's just another little tool.
Oh,
If you're down in the doldrums and you're just feeling, how do I get out of this situation? Well, think back and look at some of the people that have really maybe helped you, might be a school teacher, and write them a little love letter and
oh,
just tell them you appreciate it. And that will make you feel good. Chemicals will be released in your brain. They're
yeah.
going to feel good. And then you can kind of keep building on that. It's just a little tool out there that I learned, which was really helpful.
Oh, I love the idea of that. And really, when as you were talking, I was thinking about all the people that have helped me, and really, I have had incredible support. I've also had some very challenging people and some very difficult and destructive people in my life. But I have had some wonderful, amazing people, and I still have plenty of wonderful and amazing people in my life, including you, of course, James.
Oh, thank
But
you.
lots of, yeah, but other people as well. And I think sometimes it's maybe something to do with the human psyche that we often take people for granted, don't we? And we don't necessarily, just as we take our good fortune for granted. I'm living in a lovely house at the moment, and I always make sure that every single day I express some gratitude for that house because it makes me happy. And I appreciate the developer who actually paid all the attention to detail to get this house looking and feeling beautiful. So, just sometimes those simple things, expressing appreciation and gratitude on a daily basis, it can really reverse those feelings of maybe stress and anxiety that come from those little weeds that have crept up, right?
Yeah, and sometimes we feel that we can't give anything or do anything, or because we're in that low point. But actually, you can, and it doesn't have to be something. It can be something really small. There was actually another. So I used to do the commute to London, and I used to walk across London Bridge every day. And there was a homeless lady on the street, and she had a sign that said, if you can't give me any, change, then just please smile. Smile doesn't cost anything, does it? And it just
Mhm.
highlights the point that sometimes when we don't feel we have anything, a smile, it's going to have that. Someone's going to appreciate it.
Yeah, all of this is just so, so important. But I think obviously you've got 3 children, 3 girls actually. I've got 3 girls as well. And how do we get across these really important foundational principles for living a good life really? How do we get those across to our children? Because they're very influenced, aren't they, by social media, what they see around them, their peers. Do you have any tips, James, in terms of your parenting perhaps as to how to raise children that are also grateful, appreciative, and sensible in terms of yeah,
Ooh.
okay, sensible, yeah, maybe that's a value judgment. Maybe
No,
we want them
so
to be silly.
yeah, so I think I mean, I don't have a. There's not a silver bullet answer. I think every parent is going to obviously approach their parenting, in their own way. But I think one thing that I mean, again, I as lovely as my girls are, they put us through absolute hell in different points of their teenage years. Shocking, actually, and all. But anyway, so there's this one thing is only they have to go through it. You can't go through it for them. So you know, I have, whether this is the right or wrong approach, I've always encouraged them to push their comfort zone on a daily basis. It's kind of what I do. That's what I know how to do. And sometimes, so just to build some resilience, but they have to, again, try to, yeah, if they can push their comfort zone, they'll grow stronger. They're still going to make mistakes. You've almost got to let them make the mistakes. You can't make the mistakes for them because then they'll learn from those mistakes. I think having, healthy boundaries. I mean, an example of that would be if you've got, a road and you've got the dotted line in the middle. Without the dotted line, cars, may hit each other. I mean, okay, if you've been to India, maybe they find a way around it. But in some of these crazy developing countries where there's literally no rules of the road. But no, in seriousness, I think if it's that form and function piece. There needs to be some boundaries because they need to know you care. And if they step out of line, I think you need to kind of hold them accountable. But I think giving them the freedom to actually make mistakes, I mean, sometimes again, as a parent, you want to keep your kids safe, but just letting them go is a really big part of being a parent, I think, because as when our children are young, the parent basically makes all the decisions because they are the primary carer or the guardian, if and then but as they get older, it's almost giving them just a little bit more freedom to make their own decisions. And then obviously when they get into young adulthood, I mean, they're on their own. I mean, they'll always have your support, but so it's just knowing when to kind of let them have a bit of slack, knowing that they're going to make mistakes, hold them accountable, and then just encourage them to push their comfort zone and, and involve them in decisions, whether it's starting a new school, I learned the hard way. I wanted my eldest to go to, private school, a college in Sussex, great school. It was my ego that was driving that. I thought, flexi boarding would give her, get to know the international students and have that great social life and have all these extra resources to kind of do fencing and other things. Anyway, it didn't work out for her. It wasn't the school's fault. She just was checked out at the end of the day and used to come home and smash her room up. But it was my ego projecting on her again, I've made mistakes as a parent. That's one mistake, but actually, she's shot to stardom and she's done really well. Yeah. So that's kind of how you've got to you've got to let them make mistakes, let them go, and then, encourage them to push their comfort zone, I think, so they can become strong and develop agency. I'm always talking to them about
Agency.
agency. You need to be able to
Important concept.
survive in the world and get things done. That's hard, right? It's a really hard world out there. Social media, it's very toxic. It's
Yeah.
awful. They're comparing themselves to these people that don't exist. I mean, it's especially, I think boys are affected too, but girls, just seen, it's heartbreaking as a
Oh,
parent
really?
to watch them go through it and then to feel they're not good enough and
Oh,
not pretty enough or whatever it might be. And as adults, we get affected sometimes, comparing ourselves. But actually, for young people, it's incredibly hard. So
oh,
there's
it
no real
really is.
silver bullet.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking about letting them go, I was thinking because we've talked a lot about team as well, haven't we, James? Because you've got a very good team around you, haven't you, at the moment? So, do you apply the same principles in parenting as you do to your
Mhm.
team? Interesting.
Well, it's a good one. So I'm a notoriously a terrible manager. Okay.
No, I don't believe that.
But I think I like to have it obviously a bit of structure. I think one thing I've learned recently is that if you can, I guess, involve your team in the vision, they've got good ideas. It's almost like I've made a mistake in the past is that maybe having all the ideas and then just expecting them to put in the time and to kind of fulfill the vision. So I think I've learned the hard way. Do have a good team, amazing team, but everyone does have that, autonomy to do their best work, but also to share in the vision. So I do try and include them, but I think it's finding the right structure, it's finding the right processes. But I don't think I've made some really terrible hires in the past. They've sold me on their skills and I've, wasted tens of thousands of pounds on the wrong salespeople and other bits and pieces. And it's really frustrating when you're trying to move yourself out the way, but sometimes you are the best person to do it. So I give an example. So my business is in the process of moving from like sales qualified business to marketing, so like inbound. So from an outbound where it's me, I'm the front of the company, to transitioning where we're actually getting inbound. And there's different skill sets involved. But yes, I
Mm.
think you need to give that freedom. I take risks, you know, mistakes get made, but chalk the mistake, if I'd much rather someone try something and get it wrong than not try. Because in this world, you've really got to keep evolving, right? It's almost like it's evolution, not revolution. And I think
Yeah.
actually Richard Harpin, that was his term. So Richard, I don't want to yeah. Anyway, he wrote a book called Nine Steps to Be a Billion, or Nine Steps to a Billion. And it's actually a really great book. It's very, very practical. But yeah, he was talking about evolution, not revolution. So just keep refining, keep improving, keep building. It's that one block at a time.
Mm.
But then, businesses go through different evolutions, don't they, as far as what skills are needed.
Yeah, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I think entrepreneurship is messy, and we can reduce the messiness, we can make the big kind of messy bundle into a relatively sorted kind of bundle, but there's always gonna be a fresh adventure and a fresh challenge, isn't there, with every day that comes, and I think that is one of the huge benefits and one of the excitements really that we all share as entrepreneurs is that every day is a day that we can shape ourselves. And what that means is that the responsibility is on us to make that day as good as it can be. But sometimes there will be difficult times and difficult challenges. And James, all of the stuff that you have shared in this podcast today has been absolute gold. It has really been fantastic just to hear your journey and where you are with your business right now. As we've talked about in the podcast, Rocket Industries is growing incredibly fast. It's such an exciting business. If you have a training business and you don't know about Rocket Industries and all the way that they can help learners, actually finance their development, then make sure that you find out about Rocket Industries and speak to James, because it is really good what they're doing there and it's working. So well done, James. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you've watched this podcast and you've enjoyed it, then please like, subscribe as ever, and make sure that you follow James as well and his wonderful podcast. James, is there anything you want to say about your podcast?
No, I mean, we're always in the market for new guests. We are, so Rocket Industries is actually launching a new podcast called After Class. And
Mm,
this is specifically targeting founders and CEOs of professional training businesses. And, the kind of loose theme is going to be M&A. So folks that have built businesses and sold them. But
yeah,
there might be businesses that are actually fast growing and looking to sell or looking to, grow through acquisition. So
yeah,
that's something that is coming soon. And I think Rocket's overarching purpose over the next 10 years, we want to impact 1 million learners to help change their lives, to smash those affordability barriers so they can access a better life, essentially, higher paid work. So I think we do have kind of, it's almost like trust the vision, well, yeah, hold the vision, trust the process. So if I can help your training business grow, or if you would like to appear on the podcast, if you're a training business out there, then, or even just be a sounding board, more than happy to spend some time with you. And thank you,
amazing.
Jane. It's been really wonderful. Yeah, today it's been really good, and I'm excited to see what we're gonna do together. And Jane's really helping me, take all these fragments and kind of bring it into some of cohesive narrative. So I look forward to sharing, the results of this partnership and future. So yeah, highly recommend Jane.
Amazing. Me
Yeah,
too.
thank you.
Lovely to talk to you, James, and see you again soon.
Okay, take
Bye
care.
for
Bye
now.
bye.
Jane Bayler is the Smart Connector, a London-based, passionate serial entrepreneur, brand marketer and business growth exploder who helps overlooked and undervalued consultants and sector experts generate consistent, scalable revenues through becoming the go-to choice of their dream clients. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate you liking, rating, and reviewing the podcast on the platform you've heard it on. And check out the links in the show notes if you'd like to connect with Jane or any of her guests in person. Thank you for listening and come back soon.